Issues and debates for AQA A-level, 15 minutes revision. This Psychboost video is going to be running through all of issues and debates. I'm going to do this really quickly, so if you feel you need more detail on anything I say, watch the video for that section. I've also got playlists full of class videos for schizophrenia, relationships, and aggression for Paper 3. If you found this channel useful and you're reaching the end of A-levels, let your teacher know so they can recommend the videos to next year's students. This channel's content is also supported by A-level psych students on Patreon. Thanks for your support, guys. I've uploaded the typed scripts for this video onto my Patreon feed for all patrons to download. Hopefully it'll be a handy set of notes in your prep. So 15 minutes. Let's do this. If this is revision, you should be testing your knowledge. So my advice is to pause when each new title appears. And guess what I'm going to say? When you can play the entire video through and guess correctly, you're doing pretty well. Gender and culture in psychology. Universality is the idea that there's a range of psychological characteristics of human beings that can be applied to all of us, despite differences of experiences, upbringing, gender, or cultural background. Gender bias is a misrepresentation of the gender differences and similarities between males and females. Psychology is argued to be androcentric, having a biased view of psychology, taking a masculine perspective with male behaviour as normal. This is due to psychology being historically conducted by men and on male samples. Alpha bias is the exaggeration of gender differences, and beta bias is the minimization of gender differences. Cultural bias is researchers judging other cultures from the researcher's cultural perspective or values. This is due to ethnocentrism, when the researcher takes their own cultural behaviour as normal. Cultural relativism suggests behaviours can only be understood from the perspective of its cultural context. Henrik, 2010, psychological findings are argued to be universal, but are conducted on weird participants: Western, educated, industrialised, rich, democratic. 68% of research subjects in a sample of hundreds of studies in leading psychology journals came from the United States, and 96% from Western industrialised nations. Psychology is changing, with the increased prominence of female psychology researchers such as Loftus and Ainsworth, and the majority of studies now conducted controlling for gender. However, a significant amount of influential historical studies such as Ash, Milgram and Zimbardo only contained male participants. Some researchers are attempting to represent cultural differences in behaviour, such as Buss including 37 cultures on his study on mate preferences. There's also an increase in indigenous psychology, with researchers from varying cultures investigating their own cultures. The majority of research is likely to continue overrepresenting American college students in research due to the ease of obtaining opportunity samples in American universities. Free will and determinism. Determinism is the idea that behaviours are the result of internal or external forces that we have no control over. Deterministic forces can be biological, such as genes, brain structure and neurochemistry, environmental, such as conditioning, social learning, and cultural, or psychic, unconscious Freudian concepts such as the id or defence mechanisms. Hard determinists suggest all events and behaviour can be completely described and predicted with no role for personal decision making, free will. Soft determinists suggest that there is still some role for conscious decision making as an expression of free will, but behaviour is largely shaped by deterministic factors. Free will is the idea that our decisions and behaviours are a result of personal conscious decision making, unconstrained by deterministic causal factors. The scientific emphasis on causal explanations depends on determinism, using controlled conditions to demonstrate a causal relationship between the manipulation of an independent variable and changes in the dependent variable. Free will has face validity. Personal experience suggests we make our decisions and act after conscious thought. However, determinists argue this is an illusion, and decisions are made before we're consciously aware of them. Deterministic arguments for behaviour, such as aggression, has important implications for the justice system, undermining the principle that the individual is fully accountable for their actions. Psychologically deterministic theories have implications for our understanding of child rearing, education, and addiction. Scientific approaches to psychology are deterministic. Behaviour is biological cognitive, soft, with only humanistic supporting free will. Humanism also rejects the scientific process, suggesting free will is incompatible with science. High concordance rates for twins with schizophrenia indicate causality. However, not 100%, so potentially soft determinism or multiple deterministic factors that have not been fully identified. Neurological EEG research by Lebert in 1983 demonstrates that brain regions decide to act before consciousness is aware of making the decision, suggesting no free will. This has been backed up by fMRI, Hines in 2008. The nature-nurture debate. The nature-nurture debate is what extent behaviour is determined by the influence of hereditary nature factors, genes, or environmental nurture factors, experience, and the relative importance or combination of both. Nature. Philosophical nativists such as Descartes assume biological hereditary, genes, is more important in determining behaviour, though much of knowledge is present from birth or innate. Nurture. Philosophical empiricists such as Locke assume learning, or the environment, is more important in determining behaviour, as knowledge comes from interaction with the world. The mind starts as a blank slate or tabula rasa. Most psychologists don't take a dichotomous view, one or the other, but take an interactionist approach, suggesting behaviours are due to the combination and interaction of nature and nurture influences. Interactionist processes include diaphysis stress models that, due to a genetic, nature factor, we're at risk or predisposed to disorders like schizophrenia, but environmental triggers must be present in order for it to develop. Epigenetics, genes are not always activated at birth, some only become expressed in response to a life experience. Studies show that evidence for a biological nature origin of behaviour include genetic evidence for disorders like schizophrenia, evolutionary arguments for mate preference, and neurotransmitter, dopamine, serotonin evidence for aggression. Studies that show evidence for an environmental or nurture origin of behaviour are social learning experiments, such as Bandura's Bobo doll, and behaviour studies on conditioning processes. Both nature and nurture perspectives are deterministic. They just differ in what factors they suggest control behaviour: biological determinism for nature and environmental determinism for nurture, with no role for free will. Twin studies support the influence of nature, as monozygotic twins often show higher concordance rates than dizygotic twins for behaviours and disorders, despite both sets sharing similar environments. Holism and reductionism. Reductionism is explaining behaviour in terms of its fundamental constituent explanations. This is based on the scientific principle of parsimony, that simple explanations for phenomena are preferable to unnecessary complexity. Biological reductionists, psychologists, suggest that the most important fundamental explanations for behaviour are physical biology, such as the presence of genes or neurotransmitters. Environmental reductionists, such as behaviourists, suggest the most important fundamental explanations for behaviour are simple stimulus-response mechanisms of reinforcement, with even complex behaviour being a series of stimulus-response relationships. Levels of explanation in psychology is the idea that behaviours can be explained from a lower, fundamental level, focusing on basic components, to higher, more complex explanations of behaviour, including socio-cultural. Holism is explaining behaviour using a range of variables across multiple levels, including fundamental, biological, environmental, but also complex variables such as how socio-cultural experience influence behaviour. Reductionist approaches to mental health disorders have led to highly effective treatment such as isolating neurotransmitters, resulting in effective drug therapy, biological, or counter-conditioning, environmental, from identifying stimulus-response mechanisms. Humanistic psychologists such as Maslow and Rogers argue humans can't be reduced to simple biomechanistic processes. Holism appreciates the interaction and the complexity of human experience that's missed in reductionism. Cognitive psychologists are also reductionist in simplifying mental processes to simplistic theoretical models of information processing, ignoring the complexity of mental processes interacting with each other. Psychology is viewed more seriously as a science when it takes a reductionist approach in identifying fundamental variables, allowing for greater objective testability, falsifiability, using experimental techniques. Reductionist approaches have allowed for a more concrete understanding of the causes of human behaviour, such as aggression, relationships, and schizophrenia, but explanations may lack validity due to lacking complexity and context. Idiographic and nomothetic approaches. Idiographic approaches use qualitative techniques to study the individual in depth. Focuses on describing the uniqueness of the subject's personal experience, not providing general laws or theories of human behaviour that apply to all. Research methods include case studies, unstructured interviews, and observations. Humanistic and psychodynamic psychology both use idiographic techniques. Humanists see each individual as fundamentally unique, suggesting it's meaningless to produce general laws of behaviour. Freud did produce laws of behaviour, but created these from idiographic case studies such as Little Hands. Other approaches use unusual case studies for theory generalisation. Clive Waring, Phineas Gage, and Tan. Nomothetic approaches use quantitative techniques to study populations, and then using this data construct general testable theories, laws, classifications that apply to all. Scientific experimentation that is objective and controlled is the primary research method. Data produced is assessed with inferential statistics before it's accepted. Biological behaviourists and cognitive psychologists are seen as nomothetic approaches, as they assume the same principles apply across all humans and have developed and tested their theories by replicable experimental techniques. Replication. Nomothetic techniques with clear procedures are replicable. Using statistical methods, psychologists are able to generalise their findings and predict future behaviour and create reliable treatments. Superficial. Nomothetic criteria tested do not give a full picture of the individual. Two people with an OCD diagnosis are likely to have very different personal experiences, even if they have the same gene in common. Hypothesis generation. Idiographic case studies cannot demonstrate the validity of a hypothesis due to the small sample. However, unusual cases can generate new areas of research or even overturn old incorrect theories. Subjectivity. Idiographic research's intensive data collection techniques such as longitudinal case studies can result in the researcher losing objectivity and introducing bias into the interpretation of the data collected. Complementarity. The strengths of both methods mean each is more appropriate in particular research circumstances. Using Idiographic can give depth and description to establish nomothetic laws of behaviour that provides a high predictive value. Ethical implications. Considering how the findings from psychological research, studies and theory could go on to actually influence the lives of the individuals studied, the subgroups investigated, and wider society. Effects on participants could be taking part in the research was directly distressing, leading to ongoing problems. Stigma from friends and family and the media. Effects on the wider public could be findings could result in subgroups being stigmatised or negative changes in wider society's behaviour. Bias reporting could misrepresent the findings. Findings could be used by governments to justify political decisions or laws that disadvantage groups. Funding for future psychological research could be affected. Social sensitivity. Siebel and Stanley, 1988. Studies in which there are potential social consequences or implications, either directly for the participants in research or the class of individuals represented by the research. The researcher has a duty to consider ethical implications and take steps to address them. Following ethical guidelines in protecting participants, such as offering counselling support and ensuring confidentiality. Conducting a cost-benefit analysis considering the potential long-term benefits of the research outweigh any short-term costs. Examples of socially sensitive studies, theories in psychology are Bowlby, the effect on working mothers, diagnosis of mental health, so do cognitive explanations blame the victim, biological theories on crime and aggression, giving excuses to criminals, and evolutionary explanations for relationships, legitimizing a gender double standard. How researchers deal with the implications is suggested by Siebel and Stanley. Carefully choosing the research question and the methodology. Think about how the research is going to be used in the institutional context and interpreted by society. This is a process of reflexivity. The researcher carefully considering their own role, responsibilities, and their influential position. Excessive concern over socially sensitive research can lead to researchers avoiding topics such as ethnicity, gender, or sexuality, leading these groups to become underrepresented in psychological research. Not considering the public's response to socially sensitive research can lead to negative effects for psychology as an area for study. Research by Milgram, Zimbardo, and Harlow damaged psychology's reputation, and this can lead to less funding. Issues and debates in less than 15 minutes. Not bad at all. I want to give a shout out to my newest patrons, George Hall, Sean Barker, Ash Hadbrew, and Max. And a massive thank you for all the patrons that have supported me for another month. Listed here in gold. Thanks guys for your support. I'm hoping to remake all of A-level and then do GCSE psychology to the same standards as my biopsych videos. It's going to take some time, but the direct support from the students these videos help is going to make that possible. If you want to help support Psych Boost and create high quality free educational content too, just follow the link. Best of little paper for everyone, we're nearly there now.